Hey everyone, this is Dr. Russ Jones.
And Brad Kennan.
We are wide open. How are you, my friend?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I know you just got back in town.
Yep. So
glad to be on here tonight. Excited. I know you wouldn't have rather done anything tonight.
I'm just trying to figure out how your shirt matches your hat.
Yeah.
Number one. Wait. Number one, it is. I'm going to say it's blue and there's a yellow in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not allowed in my house.
Oh, really?
No, it is not.
This is just what I had on today. So I did notice, we've been wearing these dark blue, black things, so we didn't get the wavering and drive everybody crazy who was trying to watch. I can see I've got a little bit of the wavering tonight. It didn't work out, but it could be worse because if I have my shirt off, then no one wants to see that.
No.
And the total thing would be wavering.
Right. I was just thinking my kids weren't allowed to wear blue and yellow together.
Oh, that's right. Just strictly because of the Michigan thing.
We don't say that word.
All right, don't say that word.
We say the team up north.
The team up north.
Right. So anyway. All right. So we'll get right into it.
Okay.
So the first 5 for today is, I don't know if you asked me last time, but I'm going to ask you this time.
Okay.
You and I were out in the woods a couple weeks ago.
Yes.
We were walking around and we come up on this nice ridge and we're looking around and it's this nice sunny spot. We're looking around and say, oh man, there's a deer bed right there. And there's a deer bed, but there's this giant bed it's in this nice plush grass and it's kind of matted down and it's in a good spot. Is that something, do you believe that is a squatch could theoretically be there? Are they going to stay there? Is that something they're going to have a daytime nap in? Is that something they're going to sleep in overnight? Where are they going at nighttime? What's your opinion on this?
I think that they lay down about anywhere they want to. And I think that it makes sense that they'd lay down a big grassy area. I mean, you and I put a camera on that spot. It's I don't remember exactly, maybe like a mile and a half or something off trail back in this place where there's a history of Bigfoot sightings. And I can tell you that not far from there, we did not come out in this particular hollow, but I found this rock overhang that was maybe, 50 or 60 feet long and like 20 feet high and had like a shell going back in. And there was all these leaves that were piled up. And it's twice I found them like that. And it was clearly, done by something. It was not natural that it was like that. So I just assumed that, something was using it, as a bed.
Did you document it and take pictures?
I don't know. I think it was maybe in the first book. I found a bed. It's weird because I think I told you before, like we all need to describe a little bit, like what is what, like what is a bed? What is a nest? Because, in West Virginia, I found a couple different times, I called them a bed, but they were in the summer and it was in the earth and it was kind of like a large donut indentation type thing, but it was enormous, the size of maybe a small car hood, from, like a Toyota Corolla or something like that. And it had a bunch of walnuts stacked up there. And so I think that it makes sense when it's inclement weather that they would be using something that might help them stay a little bit warmer, but clearly they're not going to do that. So, what do you call it all the time? Do you call it a bed or is it called a nest or, what I mean? Like, I'm not sure. I told you before that, one time, and I may have talked about it, I don't recall, that I had found a bunch of sticks and it was like almost like a blind, but they were, as big as your wrist and broken off and twisted. And it was clear something had did it, but it was like not a nest. It wasn't a bed, was it a blind? And when I was looking at it, I was like, gosh, like a lot of times we need to maybe more clearly differentiate exactly what we're talking about when we're talking about things that we believe that, Bigfoot does to manipulate sticks or the earth. Or
I would think that a bed would be temporary and a nest would be more permanent. It would be my definition.
Okay.
Because a nest would take actually you think of a bird's nest, it's going to take a couple days or however long to build that nest, and it's going to be nice and mud and all this stuff put together, where a bed you just lay down.
You just throw it around.
Yeah. I tell you who we could ask though.
Yeah.
Probably our next guest.
Got a guest for us?
We got a guest.
All right.
You get the guests. I just bring them on. we're going to bring on Chris Spencer from the Olympic Project.
Hi, guys.
Chris,
And he's here.
how are you, my friend?
I am good.
Thanks for joining us, my friend.
Yeah,
no problem.
Absolutely. So you heard our discussion. I assume that you could hear us talking.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
The difference between a bed, nest, whatever you want to call it, it is what it is. What is your experience? I know that out west that you guys have found some things and maybe even redefined what it is. So let's get your opinion. How about that?
Well, I like your description of a nest being more permanent than a bed. Basically, my thoughts on the subject is our target subjects are on the move a lot. I don't think they're making permanent bed situations very often, but in 2015, and most people know about this, timber surveyor, no Bigfoot researchers were involved in finding these things. A timber surveyor was surveying some property for a logging company to log, and they have to go down a certain distance from creeks. Well, he was surveying on a salmon-bearing creek and designating where they could log to. The timber itself I think is close to 50 years old. Anyways, very thick in there. He was in an area that humans don't go. He was in there doing a job. He had to be there, and he stumbled upon 7 very large ground nests that were constructed of huckleberry boughs. And when I say large, the largest was 5 feet by 8 feet. The majority of them were about 5. Most of them were about 5 feet by 6 feet. A couple smaller ones, all oval shaped. There was one that was more round. And I say that because bear beds are usually very round, and actually they're not very large. But these were all made of huckleberry. The huckleberry was broke off, snapped off, and transported from as far as 30 yards away and constructed into these nest things. And it was definitely a more permanent situation. For whatever reason, we don't know what for. We have our ideas. But it was definitely a situation where whatever constructed these things was going to be there for, I would imagine, at least a week, maybe 2 weeks. So, and the nests were found in May, and we pretty much think they were probably built in February, March time. So they were approximately 3 or 4 months old when they were found by the timber surveyor. And this timber surveyor happened to know Derek, and they end up calling Derek in, and that's why we're there. So,
how long, just looking at them, obviously you've been and visited these things. In your opinion, how long would it take something to kind of collect this, build this thing? Is this something they could do in a couple hours? Is it something maybe a little bit over time? I think were they kind of woven together? I think I've seen pictures, they're kind of woven together even.
So some of them, it was layered, like you had larger branches, like 1 inch to 2 inches thick on the bottom, and some of the branches were actually stuck into the ground, and the smaller branches were laid on top and woven around the bigger branches. Derek and Shane actually did an experiment, and they built the nest themselves, and it took them about 45 minutes. And like Shane will tell you, or Derek will tell you, it wasn't even as large or as full as the ones that were found. So yeah, I couldn't tell you how long it took them to build it, but there's some effort into building these.
Okay.
And there were multiple. It wasn't just like one. There were 7 in the original nest site. So, and they were all strategically placed along a ridge that dropped straight down into a salmon-bearing creek. So,
what'd you think when you first saw them?
So I didn't see them till 2017. So they were actually fairly degraded when I went in, but even in the degraded state, Shane took me into the largest one, and I was just like, what does that? I mean, I was impressed. Even after they were already 2 years old and they were degrading, it was just impressive, just the size of it. It's like, what does that?
If I remember right, didn't you guys take some bear experts and some primatologists and other type of scientists in to look at them?
Yes, right in the beginning, I believe when the first time Derek went in, they had someone from DNR, the timber company. I believe they had a bear biologist with them. I know they brought in wildlife biologists. Shane brought in some primatologists. So they brought in whoever they could get to come in and look at it, and everybody had the same reaction. They've never seen anything like this. This does not look like bear. It's not bear behavior. So
My my thought would be, the the timber company would just kind of be wanting to hush it up anyway.
Exactly.
I got my tinfoil hat on half the time, and I'm thinking, these guys want to get this swept under the rug as quickly as possible, and just say, it's a bear, it's a bear.
we kind of lucked out in that department because the owner, who's retired now, he had, I think, a family member had a sighting, so they already were interested in the subject, and it was just a shot in a million that it dropped into Derek's lap like this. So
had they had a sighting on the location where you guys had found the nest, or is it a different place?
Took place somewhere else, actually. But they knew about the Olympic project because I think Derek, he's a landscaper by trade, and he had done some landscaping for the owner of the timber company. I don't know the full details, but they just knew that Derek was into Bigfoot research. And when the timber surveyor found this, of course, it freaked him out, and he backed out of there and told his boss, and they got wind of it. The guy thought of Derek, so they brought Derek in.
Well, that's good. Okay. So when we won't go into your entire history, but at some point in your life, you got interested in this subject. And I do recall that maybe you had an experience with your son. Is that true?
Yes.
You want to tell us about that?
Yeah. So I've always been interested in the subject. Actually, Grover Krantz was my anthropology teacher in '92 and all that. I grew up, my parents had a cabin in Packwood, Washington when I was little. Me and my dad found some big tracks that always was in the back of my mind. But Bigfoot was not like an obsession until 2013 when my son was just turned 13, or not quite 13. His spring break, he wanted to go camping, and it was a cold, wet year. I'd gotten him a little Walmart 2-man tent for Christmas, and he wanted to use his tent, and it didn't have a rain fly, of course. And
so Russ doesn't have kids, so he doesn't understand the fact that when we buy two-man tents for kids, they're not 2-man tents. They're like 1.5 child tents.
Yeah.
But somehow dads get roped into sleeping in them with their children.
Yeah.
It's fun, isn't it? It's great.
Yeah. My head's pushed in this wall. My feet are pushed into the other wall.
Well, we've all been there.
I'll make it quick because I've told the story so many times before, but it was fine. We went east. It was raining here in Longview. I'm in Western Washington. We decided to go east, and we ended up in Skamania County campground, which is right on the Columbia River next to the Wind River. And it's just a little timbered campground. You got Highway 14 there. There's a baseball field behind it, but we were the first people there. It was April 5th. The campground had opened April 1st. And like I said, it was a cold, wet spring. So a lot of the animals, there were elk herds down lower at that time too. We went in, set up camp, did a little walk around, and we found some interesting impressions in the ground next to the river. We took a trail back towards our camp within the campground in the timber, and we actually found this a big vine maple that was twist broke, and it was fresh. It had happened really recently. It's twist broke and pushed behind a tree, and right below it, impression in the pine needles was an 18 by 8 or 9-inch track. I have a picture of it somewhere. And we found a couple more impressions the same size, 18 by 9 inches. And the one in the pine needles, though, was fresh enough that you could see toes in it. And so we were it was light out, of course, so we were excited. Oh, this is cool. We found this stuff. And we went back to camp. We went fishing, came back when it was around dusk, and it started lightly raining. Well, like I said, his tent did not have a rain fly, so I had a couple smaller tarps in my Jeep. So I took some paracord and put these tarps over our tent. Around 9:30, he went to bed, and I went to bed about 10. And I'll be honest, I was thinking about that track and that lint twist break we found about 50 yards behind where we're camped, and that was in the back of my mind. And so I crammed into this tent. I did fall asleep, and I woke up sometime after midnight to movement in the campground. I hear something large moving in the campground, and my first thought was elk, because like I said, the elk were down low at that time, but it didn't sound like herd animals. I started kind of drifting off to sleep, and something grabbed the tarps and jerked on the tarps, and I sat up and I just cursed. I was like, what the? It woke Jameson up, and I'm like, it was just a bad dream, go back to sleep. And I laid there and I was like, did I hear what I heard? Because I was just about falling asleep when it happened. And I was kind of talking myself into the fact that, okay, I'm just hearing things, imagination's getting away from me. And about that time that I'm thinking that, it happens again. And this time I had the fob to my Jeep in my hand, and I hit the panic button, set off the horn and the lights. Well, woke Jameson up and got him back to sleep, told him, oh, this is an accident. But I didn't sleep the rest of the night. And I sat there all night, and every so often I would hear movement. And I was so freaked out. And I had my gun. I always have a sidearm with me. I couldn't get myself to get out of the tent. I was so freaked out. I was hearing stuff moving around. And it wasn't like constant. It was just like every so often I'd hear movement. And then at one point, because we were next to the water, I heard splashing in the water. And it was probably around, I looked at my phone around 4. And I'm just thinking, get out of the tent, you dummy. And about that time, there was a big knock. It was somewhere in the campground. It sounded like rock on tree, big knock. And then I didn't hear any more movement. It was about 15, 20 minutes goes by. And I'm like, I'm getting out of the tent. I got out of the tent, built up a fire, and I waited for Jameson to get up. And when Jameson got up, I told him, I'm like, what'd you hear last night? And he was like, I heard you cussing, and then I heard the Jeep horns go off, and I told him what I heard, and he's like, I don't want to stay here again tonight, Dad. I'm like, we're not, and we packed up and left. So
it's kind of funny. It's for years I made fun of people that have these experiences, and I saw it was I saw a hand or I saw a shadow, and I didn't get out of my tent, I didn't do this. I'm like, well, just get out of your tent, So I had an experience, and I was in a camper, and it rocked this camper, and I knew there's this window right by me, and it was right by my feet. And all I had to do was look down through this window, and I knew this thing was going to be looking right at me. And I said, you know what? Screw it. I'm not looking out the window. I'm not doing it. So I have empathy for you because I've been there, and I know exactly what you're talking about. So I agree with you. So you had this, you've always been interested. Grover Krantz obviously being in your life. I would assume you were in college in the 90s, so we're probably about the same age. I think I graduated in like 95 or something like that. So Grover Krantz, you did all this stuff, you had this experience, and would you say that was 2013 when your son
that was
13?
2013.
Okay.
And basically after that I got really interested, and I started catching up because I hadn't really paid attention to the subject much. I did, but I started listening to podcasts. Podcasts were becoming pretty popular then, and I'd heard Shane. He was doing 2 different podcasts at the time, and I heard him on a podcast, and then I heard this guy named David Ellis on a podcast talking about audio recording, and that really intrigued me. I'm like, that's kind of cool. I'd like to stick an audio recorder out in the woods and just see what I get. And so in 2014, I did a lot of running around. I went to the BFRO public site and was looking for areas close to where I live where there'd been sightings. And actually, David Ellis had it's still there. There's a 2009 Class A report up near St. Helens that's not far from where I live. And that basically led me to start recording in an area that I call X1. And after about 3 months of recording, I actually got some suspect knocks and vocalizations. And what I didn't know at the time was about 6 months before I started recording there was actually a juvenile sighting 3/4 of a mile from where I was recording. And I found that out. I didn't find that out till like 2017, and I started recording there in 2015. But anyways, one thing led to another. I went on a public expedition with the OP, got to meet David, got to meet Shane and Derek, and I just became good friends with them. And I was basically, David was kind of my mentor in what I do with the audio. And around 2017, Shane invited me to join the OP. So
Okay.
that's kind of,
So for some of our people that, we're these, at one time we were defined as these, I don't know, I don't want to insult anybody, but that lower class, East Coast guys, there's nothing in the East Coast. Everything's in the West. So a lot of the people in the East Coast maybe not pay attention to a lot of stuff that's going out West. Everybody's heard of the Olympic Project, but maybe even for people that aren't into Bigfoot or Sasquatch, just listen to this. Can you give us kind of a high level overview of what the Olympic Project is?
so it was founded by Derek and
For everybody, that's Derek Randall's.
Derek Randall's and Rich Dramone.
Okay.
And it was basically there. You have the Olympic Peninsula in Washington, and it's just this huge area that much of it is just untravelable, and people just don't go into it. It's a huge national park, and there's reports there all the time, and no one was really covering that area. And that's when Rich Dermo and Derek Randalls started the Olympic Project. And originally they started out on a game camera project, and you'd have to ask Derek how many cameras they had out, but it kind of morphed into just a bunch of different investigations all around the Olympic Peninsula. So.
To give the listeners an idea, at one point I remember it was well over 100 game cameras. They were kind of my role model when I started, and then now I know that it's just not as large a part of the project. But
so you've been doing this for several years, obviously. You sent me some audio clips. I have the slides that you've sent me. I have the movie that you sent me of the 3D scan of the foot. So I have all these things we can bring up. Let us know what you want to talk about.
Hey, let me ask him a question. I'm still curious about the nests.
Yeah.
So, people may or may not know about, there's this new type of DNA testing called eDNA, environmental DNA, and it's gave all the Bigfooters big hopes that something could happen with this. And essentially what it is you could take a sample of water and be able to tell everything that's in that stream or everything that's in the lake. Or if you saw a Bigfoot step in a certain area, you could scoop up the soil and have somebody test it. But of course the problem with it is it's not readily available everywhere. It's pretty good at species that are known, not so good at unidentified species, and the samples degrade or break down rapidly. So there was I don't want to say a project, but there was they were trying to raise money to do the testing, and I know I donated, and so did a lot of other people, but I never really heard anything. And then later someone had told me that, it was new to that type of testing. None of us really knew how to go about it or whatever. And so that some of the samples weren't collected correctly or something. I always wondered about that. Is that how it happened, that the samples didn't work out the way we'd hoped?
I'm not the person to really talk to about this, but I will tell you my take on it.
Okay.
Basically, Meldrum had set up money donation to get it done, and a DNA scientist said that he would do it as kind of a side project with his students or something.
Yes.
I don't know the details. I know it was collected properly. I don't know which nest it was collected out of, but it was filmed. Shane and Meldrum made the DNA collection. The thing is, This happened years after the nests were found. The nests were found in 2015. I think the collection was done in 17 or 18. No one knew anything about eDNA when the nests were found. No one thought of DNA collection at the time the nests were found because the nests were already 3 to 4 months old in the first place. So they brought in a number of people into the nest site to show them the nest. So we can't say that the nest didn't get contaminated. Now, this is just my point of view.
Right.
The samples were sent off and nothing was heard about it. And then Derek got a phone call, talked to the scientist that did the test, and he said it was all human. And that was it. So there's the points that I want to make. There's absolutely no documentation of a test. There's no documentation of how that test was done and how the conclusions were found. There's none of that. There was a phone call, and that's it. And that's about
my theory on that, right? I got my tinfoil hat back on.
Yeah.
And as soon as it pops up in their little genome database and the federal government hits it and says, "Oh, Sasquatch, make phone call, send a guy in a black Suburban in a black suit with the little flashy light thing and hit him up," and it was swamp gas, and it was human.
Well, and the other thing about eDNA, as you pointed out, originally it's meant for testing water samples.
Mm-hmm.
I know now that it's advanced, and every year DNA testing advances. But at the time, it's super expensive. It's still super expensive.
Yeah.
And at the time, eDNA was pretty much only being used to test water samples. So I don't even know if anybody really knew how to go about testing soil samples. And so it's above my pay grade. That's a discussion to have with Shane or Derek.
Yeah, I know that the race is on to find more nests in that same area because everybody can, I'm sure everybody's going to be a little more careful the next time. And then not to feed the conspiracy theory, but I know the scientist that did the DNA testing, how should I say this? He's not very popular in the Bigfoot community. And a lot of people feel like that a lot of the samples and the testing that have been done maybe haven't been specific enough for what we're after, that he was kind enough to do them, but maybe it was just to appease some people rather than,
I don't think it was taken very seriously myself. If an actual test was done, there should be documentation of it. The process, the process of how the test was done and how you came to your results. And, the other point is I don't think too much about DNA myself. I know it's a big deal for a lot of people, but until you have a specimen, any DNA collected is automatically going to get labeled human, in my opinion. I mean, you don't have a specimen to compare it with, if that makes sense. If you're going to do DNA, you got it. It's either going to be said it's contaminated or it's human. Because I personally think they're closer to us than if we're 98% DNA wise with chimps, then I imagine this thing's probably a lot closer to us. So I don't know. For me, the DNA thing is not something I think about too much.
I heard this story about out west. There was a researcher that was very serious at a Bigfoot researcher, and he had a great witness. And a witness was having this Bigfoot come up on their property. And apparently it came up on their porch. And when it stood up, its head broke out the overhead light on the porch, caused it to bleed everywhere. And the guy came out and took a sample, was very careful with it, sent it into the researcher or the DNA scientist that we're talking about in this case. And it came back human. And that researcher quit doing research. He just said, "This is never going to happen. They are never going to acknowledge this. I'm done."
Well, I think at some point, if you had somebody that has that $250,000 or whatever it costs to generate that genome of a certain sample, because I think, don't they just kind of kind of have markers in the DNA, and they just kind of cross match these markers. They really don't go too down too far, like you were talking about, Chris. So unless that person steps up with that $250,000 or $500,000, you get a good sample, you have them do the whole genome. Now you have something to compare it to.
Right.
As luck would have it, we have a university in the eastern United States that there is a PhD scientist that now has gotten approval for eDNA samples, and the university has their own eDNA machines. So it doesn't cost as much to do the samples. My understanding, we're in October, the end of October here in 22, is that in the spring, they're going to be getting samples. The big thing, of course, is I think that we have to monitor the samples we get to make sure that they are legitimate, good samples that are coming in, so you don't waste all this money on sketchy things that people are doing out there.
Horsehair.
Yeah, horsehair, whatever it happens to be.
Yeah.
You know, I'd like to have it. We had talked about, Brad, going around with microscopes at some of the large Bigfoot conferences and collecting samples that could be forwarded on that were at least vetted, that they weren't horse, bear, deer, the normal type things.
Yeah, that's the thing. Chain of custody, and really, when you take samples, video it. Like even when we cast tracks, we video everything. We all carry. I mean, I carry DNA collection kit. We all carry them. I don't blow it off. If I find something that might produce some kind of DNA, we're going to collect it, obviously. But as far as the other stuff, that's not my forte. So.
Okay, well, I was, one other thing, and I don't want to get off. I know Brad has some things that he wants to get to tonight, but while we were talking about the nest, one of the things that was extraordinary that you do, and I guess this might lead into what Brad was talking about there, was that you guys did a project for 2 years where you put up recorders in the areas of the nest, and then you had scientists look at and you're using software as well to identify all the different animals. And I know that at one point I was, lucky enough to get a look at all the information over the course of that time and was very impressed about that. What can you tell me about that, and what type of conclusions have you guys drawn from that 2 years of data where you were listening to everything that was there?
Okay, so it's ongoing. We haven't met the 2-year mark yet.
Okay.
We started it. So what happened in 2020, Shane asked me if I wanted to start doing some long-term recording, because I came up with these long-term recorders. I call them LTRs. People out east call them LDRs.
Yeah.
Basically taking a recorder that has a time record function on it. And originally I was using a Olympus LS7 and hooking it up to a 12-volt lithium battery, and using Omni mics. They're the cheapest route, but now I usually buy microphones from Charles Kimbrough. He makes some really good mics.
Oh yeah, we like Charles.
Yeah, and so, but in the beginning, I started out with the big, heavy 12-volt battery. That's morphed into now I just use 2 D-cell batteries for some of my LTRs. But in the beginning, I was getting 20 to 30 nights, depending on the weather. Really, when it gets cold, your battery life dies out. Now with the D batteries, I'm getting 30 to 40 nights with the LTRs. But needless to say, that's what I started out with, and I put some recorders out there in 2020. Well, I started talking with Wes Liam from Squatcher Metrics, and he's a statistical analyst, and he's like, wouldn't it be cool to just catalog all the known animals in the area? And I'm like, let's expand this. Let's do this and try to get as many nights as possible and catalog all the known animals. And was doing that in my main area down here in Southwest Washington in X1. I was constantly trying to record as much and identify as much, because you create a sound picture. You think you know an area. Well, stick a recorder out there at night. You're going to find out a lot about the known animals. And the more you know about the known animals in the area, the more you're going to learn about the unknowns, the possible unknowns. So me and Wes talked about it. So in 2021, I started putting these LTRs out, And then I'd been sitting on it. There's an outfit called Wildlife Acoustics. They make an audio recorder called, it's an SM4,
Mhm.
and they're very expensive, but they're designed to do exactly what I'm doing, but with really good quality mics on them. And wildlife biologists use them all over the world, for bat studies, frog studies. There's a primatologist from France using them to track chimpanzee movements, and she's flat out said herself, in Africa, it's easier to track the chimpanzee movements with the audio recorders than it is with game cameras. Um, there's some wildlife biologists here in Oregon that they're doing barred owl studies and spotted owl studies with these recorders. So it's not unheard of for scientists to use audio to study known animals. And I dropped the money. I bought one in 2021. I love the thing. It'll hold two 1 terabyte cards, and with external power, you could leave it out there for 6 months if you wanted. I have mine set up right now. I can get about 60 nights. I don't let it go that long. We go in before then because it's a lot of audio to review. So in 2021, I had 3 LTRs out, and then I replaced one with the SM4. We have 3 different positions within the nest area. It's in a ravine where I have long-term audio set up. And we go out at least once a month. I collect the audio, service the recorders, and then I review it in spectrogram on Audacity. And after I review, I have all my notes, and I log everything that makes a noise. And then I got a spreadsheet that Wes created, and I put in the time, the date, the time,
it's meticulous.
the species, the whatever notes I take, what type of call it is, and if it is an unknown, I do have hertz levels for known animals as well for comparison. But if it's an unknown, we give the maximum frequency and the minimum frequency on it, and then I send it to Wes, and then he's got a bunch of other data like moon phase, weather, that he plugs into it, and then he can start doing a statistical analysis. Now, he did a little light one last spring that's what's been put out. But we haven't done an in-depth analysis of it yet. I'm still actually reviewing and collecting data. We plan to record with the 3 recorders. We have 2 SM4s now and just one of my homemade LTRs. So we got 2 professional recorders out there right now. We're going to record till March, and that'll give us 2 full years. And 2021, we only recorded, I want to say 176 nights got recorded for the whole year, because my LTRs, weather, power, whatever, knocks them out. The SM4s, I don't have that problem. We have captured 100% of all the nights to date in 2022. I've reviewed up to July, all 3 recorders. I'm in the process of reviewing August and September right now. But all I do is review audio right now. That's pretty much when I get off of work, and I'm visually reviewing it. You can't do this using your ears. I mean, you use your ears when you see stuff, but you got to use a spectrogram and visually look at it. And so that's where we're at with it right now. Next year, Wes plans on doing some really in-depth analysis of it, because numbers don't lie, like he's always telling me. And we've already noticed some really interesting things about it.
Anything that you want to share at this point?
There's a presence in the nest area much more often than originally thought. They're moving through that area quite a bit. It's sound. There's suspicious audio happening much more often than we ever imagined. Definitely, there's a connection to some of the known animals. There's a specific coyote call. It's a warning location call that usually the alpha male dog does when there's a predator in the area, and he basically either scream barks or scream howls, and it's always one coyote, and sometimes it'll do it for once or twice. Sometimes it'll go on for hours. Whenever that call shows up within a 24-hour period, there is suspicious vocalizations or percussives. If not within minutes of the suspicious stuff, there's a direct connection on the,
Wow.
because each night I'm recording dusk till dawn. So each night, goes from one day to the next. So within that period, there's almost always coyote warning location calls when we get suspicious activity. There's a really strong connection there. Another thing that we're kind of looking at that Wes just pointed out to me, we just recently were kind of talking about, he's like, 94% of the mornings that you have suspicious vocalizations and suspicious percussive sounds, you get a lot of ravens in the mornings, because my recorder goes to usually 6 in the summer, and I'll put that out to 7:30 in the wintertime. But just before the recorder shuts off in the mornings, I get a lot of raven calls. So there's interesting connections like that. We don't know, but there's also typically suspicious vocalizations typically happen between dusk and midnight. And then after that, it's usually suspicious percussives in the late evening, early mornings. Basically from midnight to the morning is when we get percussives, and we do get vocals once in a while, but most of the vocalizations, I think he said 84% of vocalizations happen between dusk and midnight. So
Okay, that's
something
interesting.
that kind of jumps in my mind is I do believe it's the city of Los Angeles uses a kind of this gunshot warning system. And I don't know if you guys have ever seen that or heard about, gunshot goes off, they use multiple sound points. They triangulate where it hit. They call the cops out there, whatever they do. Is that something maybe that guys could look at is the future? Not so much that system, but hey, I have three long-term recorders set up, on this day at this time, I had this vocalization. From over here, I can hear it. From this spot, I can hear it better. And over here, so now we're going to try to get some triangulation of exactly where that thing's moving to.
Yeah, so I can, you can kind of do it with the position of your mics, because all my recorders I'm doing stereo, so I've got 2 mics. So when I'm looking in spectrogram, I can see if a vocal's closer to this mic, and I know which direction each mic is located. I can figure out where, if it's coming from north or south, if it's closer to this recorder or that recorder. The SM4s do have GPS, and if you have 3, mine don't, because I didn't pay for it, because it's another $175 on the $900 they cost. And if I only have 2, if I was to get 3 SM4s and had GPS on all of them, it will automatically do that for you, because it will automatically be connecting to satellites themselves, and you don't even have to set the time if you have the GPS. It'll set the time whatever area you're in, and it will do that.
So you're saying GoFundMe SM4 recorders?
No, I honestly, everything we do, we fund ourselves. It's out of our own pocket. I don't like asking people for money.
Yeah,
and
just throwing it out there. I mean,
yeah. And it's not the first time someone's asked me about triangulation, and it's something that I would like to do in the future. It's just, I'm honestly kind of overwhelmed with what I'm doing so far.
So, I mean, yeah, it'd be nice if you're getting paid for Bigfoot.
Right. So then the next thing that jumped into my mind was, so you're up in Microsoft territory, up in that northwest with all the tech companies. What they're doing with AI these days is amazing. And if there was some way that you could get with somebody that's got some AI, whoever that is, and say, man, I got all this stuff. I wish we just run it through an AI and let it make the decisions for me.
Yeah. Interestingly, too, about those SM4s, I have one myself sitting in my barn, because, I just have not done this.
Oh, Russ.
Recording, I know.
Get it out there.
I wanted to put it out at my farm because there's a park there, but what I found was there was so much noise because I was in farm country that it took much more time, and I'm already really busy with all the other stuff that I'm doing. So it was like, But what appealed to me so much about it was, they have software. The software was like $1,500 that ornithologists would use. If the listeners are interested, that's people that study birds. So they don't have to send scientists into the Amazon jungles anymore. They just stick one of these recorders out there. Someone goes and picks it up in a while. They run it through. If there's one bird they don't recognize, then they send a scientist in. So it saves all this money from the universities, from governments for research. And they have discovered a lot of new birds just using that SM4.
Yep. Yeah, I'm still learning how to use mine. I mean, I got the basics to get done what we need to get done, but it's crazy. When I first started reviewing audio from my first one, I was just amazed that just the picture in the spectrogram was so clean. And then I go to review audio from one of my LTRs, which have good mics on them, and I'm like, this is crap.
So primitive.
Yeah, it's like, oh my gosh. But it's I excuse me, I enjoy obviously I'm very interested in Sasquatch, but I actually enjoy learning about the other animals that I'm recording too. Because when I got into this, I considered myself a pretty competent outdoorsman, and man, I did not know near as much as I know now, just from listening to the coyotes, the elk, and the different owls. You learn a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I tell you what, earlier in the day, you sent me a bunch of stuff. We're almost, this hour is actually zipping by pretty quick here. What would you give me the couple of the top audio pieces? Let's play them here and let's talk about them. How about that? What do you got?
Let's I think I don't even remember what I sent you. I worked shutdown last night. So let's try. Go ahead, Chimp Fit. It's not the best recording. It was actually recorded with one of my LTRs and not the SM4, but okay. It's you can't mistake it.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and hit that one. All right, I think I had the loop on there the first time.
Wow, it really does sound like you're in Africa or something.
Absolutely.
So what's interesting about that, we had been in there that day. That was another thing I was going to point out. Wes has pointed out, when we're in the area, usually the night that we're there, there's usually suspicious vocalizations or percussives. So anyways, Chimp Fit occurred at 10:08 p.m. We were there at 10 in the morning servicing the audio, and while we were servicing the audio, we had heard vocalization come out of the ravine. And we're like, that sounds like them. It was just one single vocal. And what was funny is just before we heard this vocal, it was just like it was like one of them loud short whoops. I was messing with the recorder, and Rebecca and Shane were talking. They're like, I hear voices. They were hearing mumbling or voices coming from the ravine. There's nothing over there. There's nothing in the ravine. It's not where people are going to be. And they were just talking back and forth about this. And about the time I sat up, I go, I don't hear anything. We hear this woo, and it was close. And so that was in the morning. And then that night, Chimp Fit occurs. On that night, I think Wes told me there were 17 suspicious vocalizations for the entire night, Chimp Fit being one of them. And there were 16 coyote warning calls the same night.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so, and about there was still some barred owl, but when I reviewed it, I was like, this coyote's going nuts, but I got this other stuff going on too. And if anybody wants to go to my YouTube, I break down that piece of audio, and you should be able to hear it a little better, but I have the spectrogram picture of it up. the signature, you can't mistake it. It's not coyote. It is not owl. It's very primate. And I actually do a comparison to actual chimp vocalizations, which are similar in character. Basically, you have a buildup of whoops that escalate into scream, and then you have these lower, like, pant hoots after it. In that clip, there's 3 different individuals. Well, the chimpanzee I compared with that clip, you have the same scenario in these chimps. You had 2 chimpanzees getting excited when they were seeing their zookeeper bring them food. And it was the same thing. You had pant hoots building up. The female was really high pitched. She builds up into a scream. And then you had the male doing these low pant hoots at the end. I was just blown away because I got the sound off the Macaulay Library sound. That's where I vet most of my sounds. If I don't know what it is, I go to Macaulay Library sound to vet. And I got several examples of chimpanzees doing similar character scenario. So I can't say that's what was going on in the nest area, but I know we don't have chimpanzees in the Northwest. And when you look in spectrogram at that scream, it's almost identical to the chimp scream. I mean, it doesn't sound exactly the same, but yeah, I break it down in my YouTube. So
what is your YouTube?
I was gonna say, give me
it's Tootle River Valley Skookum Chris Spencer.
Spell that.
Toutle.
Toutle. All
River.
one word?
Yeah.
SKOO
KUM.
KUM.
Yep.
Go ahead. Is that it?
Yeah, it's Tootle River Valley Skookum Chris Spencer. I didn't expect to have.
Yeah, you're kind of doing it for you.
Yeah, I was.
Oh, okay. All right. All right. So, like I said, we got a lot of. You sent me all kinds of stuff here.
Yeah, we didn't. I didn't expect to go through all of it.
That's all right. Anything else that you'd like to maybe play one more for the listeners here and see what they think?
I think there's one. It's called High-Low Howls. I think it's NA3 High-Low Howls.
While Brown's looking for that, Chris, I always have to ask Bigfooters because, we're in the woods a lot. We're in the woods at dark a lot. So what's the scariest experience that you've had since you've been in the woods?
Honestly, the 2013 experience, that was the scariest. I've had a couple. I sent a clip. We could play that, actually, if you wanted. I sent the clip of one of the more scary nights I had. We were out in 2018. Me, Rebecca, and Nathaniel Bronis were in an area that had a lot of reports in the wintertime. And we'd gone out on a night hike because Nathaniel's really into night hikes. It was 39 degrees. It was January. We were on a logging road in the Gifford-Pinchon National Forest. And I had my little FLIR Scout. It was lightly raining. I could hardly see anything. I mean, those little FLIR Scouts are not very good anyways. And
right.
Nathaniel stops. We were about 3/4 of a mile away from where we were camped. And he stops. He goes, "I'm going to do 3 knocks." And we're like, okay. I'm not big into doing that, but he is. And he does 3 knocks. And we sit there. We turn all our headlamps off. And we're just sitting there in the dark. And 2 minutes goes by. We don't say anything or do anything. And all of a sudden, Rebecca, she had heard some movement above us as she's saying, those were, and she was commenting that Nathaniel's knocks were good. She's like, "Those are really good." Pow! Power knock. And I mean, power strike. I don't know. It sounded like a gunshot went off about within 50 feet of us. I jumped out of my skin. Nathaniel cursed. And at the time, that's the first time I ever heard him curse. And I sent you that clip. I actually got it recorded.
Is that walk-in NA3 suspect?
Oh, no, that was that's another one.
What's it called then?
It would be it was in January 2018 Power Strike.
Because it kind of truncates my stuff here, so
So are you guys finding other things out there like footprints and
possibly.
whatnot and handprints, anything like that you guys are casting?
We cast one print. We don't find a lot of prints because the ground is just almost all vegetation and dead vegetation. It's not really conducive, but we do find impressions occasionally, and we cast one this last May that we found. Actually, Shane found it. Todd scanned it. He's got 3D scan app on his phone. I have one too. He 3D scanned it, and when we looked at the 3D scan and I saw the hill, I was like, no, we're casting this. It's 12 by 6 inch. It's not a huge one, but where it was in the middle of the thick huckleberry on a ridge line that we're just walking up looking for possible new nests. And it was right next to a tree. I almost think whatever did it was
is that this?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
And I showed the 3D scan.
I'm gonna blow Russ's mind right here.
Oh my gosh. I had to get that app on my phone.
Well,
I upgraded my phone just so I could get it.
You need something better than an iPhone 1.
It's got to be i12
now.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yeah,
so I think you need LiDAR. So that you need a phone with LiDAR, correct? With the laser for Apple. Is that what you're talking about? Which I think is what you have to have. Is that correct?
Yeah, it uses I have an i13 mini that I can do it with. It uses your front camera. And what Todd does, so he doesn't have to pay for the subscription, or what I do too, is we'll scan it and then you can move it around yourself, and then we screen record our scan. Because if you want to save the actual scan to make a 3D print, it costs you money to subscribe. So we just let you scan as much as you want. You just can't save any of them, and we move it around with our finger and screen record it for those little videos.
Gotcha. So I think this is the audio piece that you are talking about here.
That's from the Nest Era, actually.
Okay.
That was just an example of every time we've moved a recorder, within a week of moving it or getting around it, I get stuff thrown at the recorder, or I actually get the tree the recorder's on whacked. They definitely are aware of the recorders, basically.
Why do you think that they seemingly care so little about the recorders compared to the game cameras?
That's something I've talked with Shane about. We talk about this a lot, but there's no lens on the recorder, and it's completely passive. It's not putting off anything, but it's still like the SM4, it's shaped like a game camera, and I strap it to a tree
exactly
like a game camera. I don't try to hide it because I already know they see it. But this goes back to when I first started recording X1, when I was just placing a Tascam out in a stump. Even back then, within a week after putting that audio out, at some point in time, something comes by and just whacks a tree. It's like, oh, human thing. And I'm sure they've watched me. I know in the Nest area, they have definitely watched us service those recorders. We know we've been watched. Some of the audio I sent you is from March when we walked in, and we didn't even know it, but they got really close to us and did some whoops, and we were servicing the audio. So for whatever reason, whenever I've moved a recorder to a new location, at some point in time, it gets discovered, and a tree gets pushed over next to it, it gets whacked. A lot of times, stuff like that clip something was thrown, it hits the tree and falls into the bushes and stuff like that.
So clearly, there's some EMF or some type of noise that's coming off from the recorders they hear, just like they do the game cameras. but they're not as worried about the game camera or not as worried about the recorders. I mean, gosh, I wish I knew how to, resolve that issue, but
It's just, who knows, but I've always said, that lens looks like an eye to me, and I don't know. That's the main difference between just the visual look of the SM4 and a game camera is there's no lens on it. So
yeah, a lot of times, you're hiding the camera so well that something can't see it. But, Bigfoot's a rare animal. It's not like they're everywhere. So even when you have a good setup, you don't know whether something heard your camera and just didn't come in, or whether, it just wasn't a Bigfoot within 50 feet of your camera.
Right.
Is, how do you know?
That's the other thing. I think that no matter how good you hide it, I think it's possible to catch them. I think it's possible. Shane's got an interesting video clip in 2017, and he had his camera on his trailer, actually made it a part of his vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
And all you see is two bipedal legs, very large legs. Quickly, it's kind of blurry, but walks by his camera in the general area of the nest area. I think it is possible to catch them, but I think most times they spot the camera before the trigger ever has a chance to go off. That's my opinion. So
I'll tell you, I've been this week. I've talked to several different witnesses, and one of the things I'm continually amazed about is they will not move, and they hold so still for such a long period of time. Brad, you and I were talking about that. I think it was last week before, about a case like that, and I heard 3 cases this week of someone clearly saw the animal very close, and they didn't even know if it was real because it was holding so still. And they turned and looked away, and when they looked back, it was in a different movement, but holding perfectly still. And I think that they're of the woods, and we're not. And, they don't have someplace to be like we do. And they're so patient. I know sometimes when I go in the woods and I'm thinking about my patients, or, about something else you have going on in your life. And I've noticed it just takes me a while to slow down when I'm walking and get in the pace of nature. Sometimes like 20 or 30 minutes that finally I slow down and I get that pace that they must live at and all of nature lives at all the time. They're not rushing around like all of us are. You said, you had to work night last night, and then you try to get home and you've got all these recordings to do. And, it's hard to do everything.
Well, that's your next book, Russ, The Pace of Nature.
The Pace of Nature. I like that.
There you go.
Let me write that down on my sheet here. I'm redoing the first book, the second edition. Maybe I can put it in there.
There you go.
The Pace of Nature.
Yeah, I had a possible sighting. It'd be my first possible sighting in the nest area this last July, and it goes to what you're saying. Whatever I was looking at was holding perfectly still, and when I looked away, it disappeared. It really made me mad, actually, because I carry a DSLR camera with a telephoto lens on it, just so if I see something I can zoom in. And I'd taken my camera off and set it down. I was resting, and we were in the nest area. Wes had come out to see the area. He lives in England, and Shane had taken him down to the creek. Rebecca was down in the original nest site about 30 yards from me, and I just took my pack off and was taking a rest. I grabbed a bottle of water, and I was scanning the ridge to where it drops into another ravine, and I just came to this really black shape that was off from all the other shadows, and it looked like it was hugging the tree, and it was about 75 yards from me, but it was big. And in my mind, I was like, it's got to be a burned out stump or something. But I stared at it for a good, well over a minute. And I kept telling myself, it doesn't look right. And I'm like, my camera's behind me, 20 feet behind me. I can't zoom in on it, 75 yards out. And finally, I'm like, okay, I'm going to grab my camera. I just knew, I'm like, it's just going to be a stump. It'll still be there. I grabbed my camera, come back, and it was gone. And then about that time, Rebecca came up, and she looked at my face because I was pissed. And And she goes, "What happened?" And I told her what happened. She actually started videoing me, telling what just happened. And as she's videoing me, there was a knock came from that direction, and we could hear brush moving away from us from that direction. And yeah, so I can't say that I saw a Sasquatch, but there's a high probability I did.
Right.
Well, on that note, let's end on a high note, I guess, if you can call that a high
Yes.
note. We know you have something else to do here, Chris, so we don't want to keep you any longer.
Yeah, sorry I got off course.
Oh no, it's great, man. I mean, you're
No.
an interesting person.
No, I mean, we'll have to have you back at some point because you do have quite a bit of audio, and maybe I'm arranged a little bit better so I can find them.
It'd help if I could remember what they're labeled. I don't even remember exactly what I said.
Well, next time we'll do it after one. Maybe
No, great. You were interesting.
Yeah, we appreciate it, and sometimes just an hour is not enough, but you know how it goes. You start going too long, and the next thing you know, people start turning off, and we want to keep gripping conversation. So
that's right.
Anyway, we appreciate it, and we'll get with you next time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, Chris. It was good
Thanks for having me on, guys.
friend.
Hey, I love your show. I listen to it on my way to work in the mornings.
Great.
Awesome.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that.
It was nice meeting you, and I've heard a lot about you from Russ and the Olympic Project. I've obviously been following that for years, so I'm glad I actually got to talk to somebody that's been out there working on it. So great.
Cool.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
All right, appreciate it. Thanks. All right, Russ, that was very interesting.
Yeah, he's a cool dude.
Very cool. That's awesome.
I mean, there's a lot of people that I meet that I'm friends with that I just think if we had more of those people out there, the Bigfoot mystery would be solved.
Yeah.
And there's probably, 50, 60, 80 that we know that are very serious about it, that are very bright, but is it enough?
Right. Well, I think I bought a lottery ticket. So when I win that $400 million or whatever it is, I'll buy.
You've been telling me I've been able to quit practicing for like 15 years.
Right.
Here I go still tomorrow.
Right. I'll buy Chris 3 or 4 recorders so we can do the triangulation and we can
there you
get
go.
This thing solved, man.
Let's just wrap this baby up.
Right.
Then I know what you would do. You would have your Bon Jovi bus, which you would tour the nation with to all the big things, and you'd have me pulling along like a little Volkswagen with a little 1.5 person tent, and then I would be following you along.
And
maybe every now and then I would break down.
I'd let you sleep on the couch.
Yeah, well, there you go. Okay, I'm good for that.
I found one earlier today. It was a Prevost. I think they only wanted like 1.7 million for it. So,
okay, well,
not to win the lottery or something. All right.
Well, it's fun.
Till next time.
That's right, my friend.